To encourage morale amongst the Australians, he wore one of their own bush hats.
The big thing, up to about 10 days before the Battle of Alamein, that we'd never encountered before, was the fact that everybody was told what they were doing, and if the officers and sergeants and corporals all got knocked off, the troops still knew what they had to do, what was required of them. This was pretty vital, and we felt as though we were let in on the secrets for the first time. It gave us a heck of a lot of confidence.
On the evening of the 23rd of October 1942, the 8th Army moved forward to attack.
We went to bed same as usual, even on the Battle of Alamein night when everybody was waiting on the headquarters to see the battle start, or see all the guns start. He just went straight to bed, got a book, and that was it.
It was the most concentrated artillery barrage of the war. The infantry cut through the German minefields so that the armour could then break out and destroy the Afrika Korps. But the British tanks held back. The battle became a solid killing match, with the infantry and artillery battling to breach Rommel's defences. The Australians lost nearly 5,000 men killed and wounded. Monty's master plan was not quite working, but he never allowed his anxiety to show.
One never saw him dejected. The reason, I think, was that he'd decided, quite rightly, that if you're going to be a great leader, you must always be seen to be confident, always seen to be constructive, and so on. Because you were always on the stage, in a way. Other people were looking at you. Is this man going to break down? I remember looking at Auchinleck and asking myself that question. Is he going to break down? And so Monty was always, as far as public view was concerned, completely confident, master of the situation.
He'd never speak at all, and you'd just sort of get a feeling that he'd be pinching his cheek and saying that nothing, never said anything at all. But when he got out at headquarters of a division or corps, whichever it was, he got out with tremendous bonhomie, as if there was no worry in the world.
After 12 days of battle, the British armour finally broke out. Rommel's once invincible army was smashed. Hitler had ordered victory or death, but Rommel fled, leaving 10,000 dead and over 30,000 German and Italian soldiers to be herded into captivity. Monty had predicted it would be one of the decisive battles of history, but he knew the casualties would be heavy, and they were.
He had a very shrewd idea of what casualties would result. He said 13,000, which was almost precisely what the casualties were. He was very conscious of casualties, I think, as a result of the First War, where there was a frightful waste of human life. The first feature of his attitude, really, was that the wounded must be looked after extremely well. Must have a first-class Army Medical Corps, and he took a great deal of interest in that. And that the battlefield must be cleared up properly afterwards.
Churchill said, before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat. It was the turning point of the Second World War. Rommel left over half his army, killed, wounded or captured, out here in the desert. For him, there now began the long retreat. Never again would he face up to a battle like this in North Africa. For Monty, it was also a turning point. He was no longer an unknown general. He'd become a household name.
When the gallant commander of the 8th Army was in London a few weeks ago to report to the War Office, and incidentally to snatch a few days' well-earned leave, the news spread like a prairie fire. The general was all but mobbed everywhere he went.
We all went to the theatre one night, And he got a standing ovation. He was in the royal box, and he got a standing ovation. He stood up, and I mean, it was a very moving occasion. It was, and of course, he loved it.
The man who snatched victory from near defeat has touched the public imagination.
It was the first major victory of the war, and he was the fellow at the centre of it.
When he went home to England and was feted as the victor of Alamein, we've got to remember England's very short of a victory, so the man who delivered was the hero of the day. When he came back from that holiday in England where he'd got this adulation from the crowds, he was a different person. Suddenly was aware what a tremendous draw he was for the crowds, and that this went to his head, I think.
The victor of Alamein now had a new boss, the American General Eisenhower. Ike had no experience of command in battle, and Monty resented having to take orders from him.
Monty never really seemed to treat Ike as his commander. He seemed to treat him as kind of a political figure with whom he could argue, contest a point of view, disagree.
Relations with Eisenhower had been strained ever since Monty claimed a flying fortress as payment of a bet. The Americans had thought he was joking, but to everyone's embarrassment, Monty demanded the plane be handed over, complete with American crew on the American payroll for the duration of the war. The Americans were speechless.
Monty could not have operated without his arrogance. The arrogance was his adrenaline. It was what kept him going. It was the fuel for his machine.
Sicily was the next target for the Allies. Monty now had to fight alongside an American general, George S. Patton, who had his own invasion plans. When Monty saw them, he rejected them as a recipe for disaster.
From Monty's point of view, he regarded him as a complete amateur. Patton didn't like people with authority over him very much. They had completely opposite temperaments. But they were both a bit of a show-offs, and show-offs never get on together very well, do they?
Patton wanted to land troops all round the island. Monty insisted they attack at the same time, in force, on the southern tip of Italy. Monty got his way. The landings were a triumphant success. Casualties were light, and the Germans soon retreated. But to show his independence from Monty, Patton now headed west, away from the real battle, to the ancient city of Palermo. It had no strategic importance, but it would be the first great city to fall to the Americans, and the glory would be Patton's. While Patton was lording it over Palermo, Monty faced fierce German opposition to the east. So Monty came to offer a deal. If Patton would return to the battle, Monty promised him another prize, the town of Messina.
Patton didn't believe a word of Monty's story. There had to be a catch in it. Immediately they'd finished, Patton issued an order to his men. This is a horse race. The prestige of the US Army's at stake. We must take Messina before the British.
Monty let Patton take Messina. His eyes were on the invasion of Italy, but he was given only a minor role by Eisenhower. The main attack was to be American. Monty objected to the plan, but they ignored him.
We thought they really needed lots of sorting out. But of course, none of them had had any war experience. This was the problem, not compared with Monty. And he thought he was dealing with a complete bunch of amateurs.
The Allied campaign in Italy was soon bogged down in a series of battles for rivers and mountain peaks. Monty felt the whole strategy was misguided. It was leading nowhere. He was certain the Allies should be preparing to land in France. In Italy, his casualties mounted.
All through December, as the troops fought and died here in the valley of the Sangro, the argument in London went on. Who was to command the invasion of France? Eventually, the War Cabinet made its decision, and on Christmas Eve 1943, a cable arrived. Monty was ordered to return home as soon as possible.
First, though, he had to say goodbye to the 8th Army. He summoned all senior officers to the cinema in Vasto, his main headquarters. One private was present in charge of the microphones.
He thanked them very profusely because he more or less indicated without them there was no him, and we recognised then that he was gone from us. Well, I felt as though I could have had my right arm chopped off. But he went then to the end of his speech and left himself more or less emptied. His voice was going down. Then, when he finished his speech, everybody stood up and they cheered, because they were all officers.
But it was very emotional. Very highly charged atmosphere. And Monty, of course, was delighted to be going to the new job, but also very emotional about leaving 8th Army. It was his army, he created it. Most people were pretty well in tears at the end of it.
I ushered him away and put my arms round him, and he was full of sorrow and tears. He were a Monty, and for whatever he did in other theatres, there could never be anyone to take his place in our mind.
At home, Monty was a national hero. Upon him rested Britain's hopes of victory. He'd become a legend, a star. The people adored him.
It was a sort of joke amongst his staff for the number of wedding proposals of marriage that he received. And there was a file kept by one of the ADCs with all these letters, and it became a sort of huge joke about how many hundreds he'd have got to proposals of marriage. And he must be very lonely, and they'd be able to solve the problem. There was never any possible likelihood of this happening. And as far as he was concerned, he was rather frightened, I think, of women. And after his wife died, my mother died, that was the end of that for him.
He was always making musing remarks about women, you know, women. He said the only thing a woman needs is a rain hat and a raincoat. And he used to ask my sons if there was a filly in the paddock when he saw them. Well, is there a filly in the paddock? You know, and this sort of thing. And I hated that. I didn't like that sort of sense of humour.
I never actually saw him speak to a woman, I don't think, in the whole time I was with him. He had a sort of, he bridled about when there was a lot of talk about women in a sort of curious, embarrassed way. Apart from Mrs. Reynolds, I don't think he had any contact, as far as I know, with any woman.
Tom and Phyllis Reynolds ran a prep school in Surrey. While Monty was abroad, they looked after his son David.
He was a very shy boy, and I was desperately sorry for him. He was really treated like as if he was a soldier. And as far as I could see, Monty had absolutely no human, normal, parental contact with his son. I used to take the son back to school in my car with my petrol.
Monty feared that others would get close to David, who was now forbidden to stay with his closest family, John and Jocelyn Carver.
But he was very possessive of David, and he was very much afraid David's affections would go elsewhere, such as they were. So I didn't think he was very fond of his father anyway.